Hello, this is Harry Paden. I am the host of the Paden Perspective. This is episode 15, and this, I think appropriately, will be on the 1967 Newark Rebellion. And it has to be designated because there were quite a few rebellions. Some call them riots, but some in the media always label our stuff with the negative words. But it was a rebellion, and I will back up my theory with facts. I have one perspective that actually helps me. A lot of the things I do historically, I consider myself a revisionist historian. By that, I revise America's history with facts. I don't just revise it because I think things. I revise it because I find out the facts and I give those who are interested, because there's some who just aren't interested. There's some who say, oh, he think he's smart. But I revise it with facts. And for the matter, I am very intelligent. There's nothing wrong with a black man with dark skin to be intelligent. That has to be investigated while you think some person of a lighter persuasion, much lighter persuasion, can only be intelligent, can only talk and speak the king's English as I can. My vocabulary is extensive. That's not a brag, that's a fact. And some people get offended by that. And I simply laugh and say, okay, let me learn a new word today. But again, getting back to the subject at hand, we're going to get into the subject of the 1967 Newark Rebellion. And again, I don't know if I got it out, because sometimes I start pontificating. I do pontificate a lot. But I lived through the 1967 rebellion. July 12th is when the rebellion began, was living in the Scudder Home housing projects. And the Scudder Home housing project that I was living in was on Mercer Street, Mercer. There were 8 buildings facing each other, 4 on one side and 4 on the other side. The floors were probably 13 or 12. Sometimes they skip that 13th floor because of superstition. But there was a lot of floors, and the apartments went through like apartment G. So if you do the math, A through H or G times 13 floors times 8 buildings, there were thousands of people. Now, that was in square footage a very small area, and the reason that they called them projects, my eye is stinging. The reason they called them projects was because it was a project. Let's see if we can provide housing for the thousands of black people who don't have adequate housing. So they built these brand new buildings, on top of each other, so the space was, condensed. And it was brand new. I was very fortunate. My family, my mother and father had a lot of children. They had 11 children. God bless them. And, I have my great brothers and sisters as a result. I was one of the older ones. But I moved into the projects somewhere around, whenever. It was, I have it in my book. I didn't research it, but maybe 1965. But it was brand new. No one had ever lived in the apartment. We lived at 65 Mercer Street, apartment 1E. Never forget it. Profound impact. Beautiful building. Everything's brand new. Those who had moved into brand new edifices know. I was a kid, because we had lived in the places where we had to heat it with coal. We called them cold water flats. This had heat. Oh, the project had heat. Another subject, another time. But one of the major problems in areas such as Newark at the time was what still is a problem now, housing segregation. And it began because, as we know, there was a migration from the South. You know, the oppression in the South, many in the South moved north because the word was you could live and work, and the North wasn't as prejudiced. The North wasn't as openly prejudiced. That's what they should have conformed in. But the North was indeed prejudiced. So when blacks started moving in, guess what happened? Now let's see what happened. Whites started moving out. And they moved out with a great exodus. We have a black neighbor. Oh my God, I gotta move. So they moved out. They moved to the suburbs of Bedminster, Livingston, West Orange, and all the other places that are still suburban, not necessarily Caucasian, because there are upper mobile people of all colors living in those areas. But at that time, people of color, oh Lord, if you tried to move up in one of those areas. But if you were white, care what your income was, care what your status was, you could at least move in because that's one of us. So Caucasian people were moving out with a great exodus. And poorer people of color were moving into cities like Newark. Newark had the highest percentage of substandard housing. Like I said, I know we lived in cold water flats. Again, you had to heat the apartment. We used the stove in the kitchen, put coal in it. You've never lived until you've lived through those conditions. But we didn't know that it was abnormal because that's what we did back then. The coal man would come and he would shout, "Coal man!" I'm not going to shout that loud because I got neighbors. And we would go out and get the coal from him, and that's basically how it was. Also, another plague at the time, again, still being plagued in many areas now, high unemployment, inferior schools. It was a corrupt municipal government. Later, Hugh Antonisio, the last Caucasian mayor in Newark, that's a fact, that's not a cut, in Newark, was later indicted on criminal charges. There were no blacks in major positions. There were a few councilmen, Irving Turner Boulevard, Calvin West, Earl Harris. See, I know that history. One of my newspaper editors one time gave me one of the greatest compliments I've ever got because he read my columns over the years, and I would talk about things like Juneteenth and all the other subjects that nobody was writing about 20, 30 years ago. And he said, "Harry, you are an elder statesman." And I said, "Oh, I like that." Elder kind of, threw me, but now I definitely am elder. That pretty gray beard shows it all. But I'm an elder statesman. But then some people try to ignore me like I don't exist. Like the history that I have isn't important, but it's important, and I try to do my podcast. If only one person watches, it was successful to me. Because this is our history. My dear Jewish brothers and sisters know all about the Holocaust. Do you know, in this area, do you know why July 12th through July 17th, 1967 is important, particularly to African Americans? Because that's when the Newark riots, see, you got me saying it, the Newark Rebellion took place. And another problem back at that time, aside from what I talked about, poor housing, segregation, schools inferior, all those problems blacks were facing on a day-by-day basis. And again, police, very brutal, very, and there were no repercussions. They just tear you up, beat you up, do anything they wanted to do because they had no one to tell them what not to do. Back during those times, the Newark police force was something like 1,400. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was around 1,400 police officers, and only 145 of them who are African American, and they police honor and dedication. Those 145 police officers probably were falling into the lines of what they needed to do. They weren't protecting people because the blue line, allows you or tells you you should follow us, not follow them. So the city of Newark, under Police Director Dominic Spina, and Spina, more than likely, the name seems like it. I always learned that names that end in a vowel tend to be Italian. Italian names end in a vowel. A-E-I-O-U, that's Spanish, but A-E-I-O-U. Was probably Italian, and it was a great, great problem between the Italian Americans and Black Americans. There was a community leader who lived in the North Ward, Anthony Imperiale, big burly guy who walked them streets and said, if any of those guys come up in my neighborhood, we're gonna bust their head. Guess what? They did it. Police didn't have to patrol the North Ward. Anthony Imperiale, look it up. Anthony, Imperiale. He later, I think, would be elected as a councilman in Newark. But he was a rough guy, and he had a lot of thuggish people. If you dared come up in the North Ward after night, you'd rather have the police beat you up than have those thugs who would beat you up because they didn't want any blacks in their neighborhood. But that was the environment at that time. Again, unemployment was high, poverty was high, and one of the other things that set up this whole thing was that in Newark, because the Caucasians had moved out, they said, oh, it's so hard to get to work. The roads are very slow. I wish that there was a highway so we could get here quickly and then get out quickly because when it gets dark, we get very scared. And the city father said, that's a good idea. So part of the problem was they were displacing black families from areas that they lived, many of them in their homes that they had for years, to build highways. Route 78, you travel that? Do you know that our highway goes all the way through Newark? Starts in Newark, but it goes to the subway. I wonder why that is. Why does it start in Newark, but then goes up to Bedminster and all the other places? You know how I go high with that? Michelle Obama said, when they go high, we go low. Well, that's just what happened. They went high. Bedminster and, all those other places, Dunnerlin and all those other places. And we kept low. So they came into our cities on the highways, but when Route 78 was built, there were many, many, many families displaced. So that was the environment around 1967. During the year 1967, throughout the nation, there were 159 such rebellions in cities such as Detroit, Chicago, I'm sure, many of the biggest urban American cities, because people got frustrated. And they said they rioted and they tore it up and they did this and that. But that's what happens when people get frustrated and they get mad. It really does. You feel powerless. You have nothing else to do. You don't have elected officials who are listening to you. The police are knocking you out. The thugs up in the suburban areas are knocking you out. So what happened was on this particular day, this particular night, because it was around, I think, 6 p.m., a cab driver named John William Smith. He was driving on a revoked license. He had a few problems. You can look it up. But he had quite a few problems, but, he had to make money like a lot of people do, You drive illegally. Well, he drove illegally. And unfortunately, he went around a police car that was blocking, and police get real aggressive. How dare you go around us? We're the police. And, because I've had it happen to me before. Police try to get real aggressive, and, they try to disrespect people, like, just because, not like Officer Joe Bolton. Back when I was growing up, Officer Joe Bolton had Oh, kiddos, hey, everything's good. Oh, let me help you across the street, old lady. Our police officers, they're monsters sometimes. Sometimes. Not all of them. But then there's those ones that's deranged and I'm a police officer, so I can do whatever I want to do. And there were many of those on that force. And, people of color, black people, Hispanic people, got tired of it. And it was on a hot day. You guys know because it's been hot recently. How it gets you hot and you're frustrated. I don't know if air conditioners were built back in 1967. Didn't do that research. But it was hot. And before air conditioning, I don't know how we did it because I lived through those times. But it was hot, so you're outside and it's hot. You're in your apartment and it's hot. And then somebody comes and tries to thug you. Someone in blue, with a badge. That's supposed to be protecting you. So John Smith, the police locked him up. And as police do, especially back then, they roughed him up. He was all bloody and everything. And this happened, it just so happened that residents of the Hayes Homes, another large housing project, they saw him and they saw John Smith was beat up and they were dragging him, put him in the back of a patrol car, took him to the 4th precinct. Please don't let me get that wrong, but I believe it was the 4th precinct. 4th precinct. I'm sorry, how can I forget? That's very important. The 4th precinct, and word started going around. Man, they just beat up this guy. They beat him up and took him into the precinct. And people were outside because it was so hot. It was much better to be outside than inside because it was so hot. And people started gathering. And then all of a sudden, during that time, people, an activist group, got together and they went up to the station. It's activist groups like my good friend Larry Ham, People's Organization for Progress, great organization, as groups like his does. They gathered and said, okay, we're going to go to the police station to find out what happened. It's just not fair. So they went up to the police station. Of course, they didn't get much information. The police came out, the station with their gear and stuff on, almost like in the South, right? Sounds like the South. This was the North. And they came out and they tried to disperse the people, but they were angry. They were angry, and they didn't care if the police had guns and rifles and stuff. They stayed out there and stood their ground. And all of a sudden, it's reported, because I wasn't there at that time. I was in Newark, but not at the police station. An unknown woman smashed the windows of the 4th precinct with a metal bar. Now, that was a bad system. Oh, that was a bad system. But that was that frustration. She took and used a metal bar and broke the window. And people started feeling empowered. Oh, wow, we're beating the police, we're doing that. And what is described as a riot, I still describe it as a rebellion took place. Police cars were destroyed, but then, as what always happens, is the thuggish people who live within the community of the good people, I lived around them, the thuggish people who shoot people, rob people, and we still don't talk about those people because that's Johnny. Oh no, that's not Johnny, that's Pookie. And Pookie got problems, so let's not retell him to the police because that's snitching. Harry's the biggest snitch in the world. I guess I am. Do something around me, I'm gonna call the police right in front of your face. But many people get intimidated into that stuff. But some of the thuggish people, oh, what if we break the window here? Forget that it's a business. Broke the windows of stores. No bars around them then. That's the reason there are bars around, metal bars and stuff around windows now because of what took place there. And ran in and looted. Particularly, the first thing that got looted was the liquor store. Because when you're depressed, you drink. So they broke in the liquor store. People were running out with bottles and bottles of stuff. And, we're happy now. And clothes, we're happy now. Oh. Very dramatic, but I'm telling you that's what happened. Now, this young man I was on Mercer Street. They had a playground right outside, and I was playing basketball. And we saw people running by with stuff, but that wasn't unusual because that was the environment. And just keep your mouth shut back there. I wasn't a snitch. I was a little boy, that ain't nothing. I'm getting no trouble. Nobody beating me up. But all of a sudden, what's going on? Wow, that's about the 15th person. That's a lot going on. And we with the area, like the mall place, was Prince Street. That's where the Jewish merchants, your mother used to always say, watch it, make sure they don't put the finger on the scale. The Jewish merchants were there, and they had their businesses, and they were the, people that owned the clothing stores and everything, not downtown. It was right up on Prince Street. You can go a block or so and get all the stuff you needed. You can go get all the meat you needed. The supermarket was up where West Caney begins. It was called Food Town. That was our only supermarket. So they destroyed Food Town. They destroyed these stores, and all of a sudden, Newark was faced with what's going on. Of course the white businesses complained. They destroyed my life work. What are you going to do about them? And they probably used some words that, those words. So around 1 a.m., police were told, and I quote, fire if necessary. And then Mayor Hugh Ananizio gave a call to Governor Hughes, at the time, governor of New Jersey, and that was around 2:20 a.m. His request was accepted. 9 minutes later, 300 state troopers were sent and activated, and soon the New Jersey National Guard were activated, and 3,400 of the National Guard were brought into our city. Our city was under siege. They couldn't have black people destroying the great city of Newark. An officer, a detective, was shot because they were really upset. Things were going on, and he died. It was a casualty, and that set the fire. They killed one of ours. Wait a minute. So it wasn't pleasant. So I'm saying this was July 12th. This actually took place July 13th, the day after, because again, remember I said 1 a.m. So I don't want you to confuse it. July 12th, it started around 6, and it continued, and people were looting and doing all that crazy stuff. So it went from a rebellion to a riot. So it was a riot. It was a looters' riot for those who are criminal, and it always takes place even today with the Black Lives Movement. There's always that element that comes along just simply to act like the thugs that they are. I have no compassion for them. Again, I put them all on an island somewhere with lions and tigers and bears. You want to be thuggish. You want to beat up our old ladies. You want to rape our women. You want to do all kinds of things. See, I have no compassion. So thank goodness I'm not a leader. I'm not a dictator, because I go through the neighborhoods and I take all the pookies and they would be on an island somewhere and you would be fighting the lions, tigers, and bears. But that's just me. So it happened, and they were arresting people. I think 20 to 25 people, 26 people. Again, I flash because I'm talking, so I'm trying to concentrate on what I'm saying. 26 deaths, and every one of them is important, so that's why I wanted to get the number exact right. The National Guard, the state troopers, they had heard that there were people, because in the projects, again, goes very high, people were shooting, and I can imagine that was taking place at the National Guard. So they took positions, as they are trained to do, and fired up at the windows, randomly. They didn't see the person, they just figured, you're gonna shoot? I see one, pow, pow. Luckily, I lived on the first floor, so, I wasn't in a position to get shot at. And my mother wasn't having nothing. We weren't near the window, we were inside, probably in our bedrooms, probably on the floor. God bless your mother. But they shot a little boy right in the housing projects where I live. I believe it was the 8th floor. That little boy was shot, It was a 12-year-old boy was shot through by a sniper because, again, for whatever reason, he was in the window. You know, like little 12-year-olds would be. He was in the window and they shot him. He wasn't shooting at the police. He wasn't shooting at the National Guard. You can see I'm getting hot. I'm palpitating here. I'm trying to finish. Wow. So it was a harrowing event, and I get pissed off. Well, we say, why don't they tell us about that? Why don't we see stuff about that? Well, Harry Paden does, but I bet I get one viewer, you know, and that's probably a family member, because my family knows about this stuff. But my people lack and perish for the lack of knowledge. If I ain't get that one again, you don't know how upset I am. Man, so that was the event, and I really lost focus because I lived through that. And now, we still are compartmentalized, mess that word up, in the neighborhoods. We still have inferior schools. There are people of color on the boards of ed, people of color who are council, people of color who are mayors, senators, and all that stuff. So why is that stuff happening now? I can do another podcast on that. I've worked with many of them. I've been an activist for all my life. I even ran for elected office. But because people like to be in control. People like to walk in the room and sit up in the front and give tons of speeches at events, make themselves visible. But some of them, not all of them, aren't visible when there's problems in your neighborhood, when there's shootings. The city of Newark, I hope that the great Eric Adams gets elected. He sounds like a man that has a plan. 20 people were shot. I love New York, and I'm back and forth in the city of New York, but I dare not go there now. I'm scared. And I'm from Newark. I was born in Harlem. But that bullet has no name on it. Now we have to take control. Now if our elected officials aren't doing the job, I am a district leader. I sit at the polling places and 5 people come, 10 people come, and that's all day from 6 to 8 p.m., 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. It ain't gonna make no difference. It ain't make no difference. It don't make a difference because you sit on your behind and you let people who look like you now treat you like the people who didn't look like you then. And you get mad and you say, why? Well, I'll end this podcast, as I always do, on a positive note. These memories are harrowing, and I really get emotional when I think back at it. First, look at my mother was alive. Last story, my mother, you know, like I told you, I was at the playground and all the people were coming by with stuff. So I went to Prince Street, ran. Of course, I knew my mother wasn't going to allow it, but I just did it. You know, you don't tell your mother everything. Went to Prince Street, grabbed me a bunch of shirts, tried not to get cut as I was going through there. So I turned into the thug that I saw, thugs that I saw. I got me some shirts and, Paden, I love the dress. Pink one, yellow one, light green one. I was happy. I mean, Paden was always into the little fashion. I came home and I said, Mommy, look, stuff free. She said, boy, if you don't take that stuff back around that corner right this minute, and I ain't going to tell you what else she said because diapers would have took us away from her, but back then she did. And we knew my mother wasn't joking. She was like 4 foot something, beautiful woman in the world, but she would take an iron cord to you. She would do whatever she had to do to raise her sons not to be thugs and thugettes. And none of us are. All 11 of her children who are successful. All our grandchildren are successful. Our great-grandchildren. So therein is the formula. Parents, be parents. Teach your children right from wrong. If Pookie is in a neighborhood terrorizing, y'all get together and put Pookie in jail. Throw his family out. Why should you live in fear because of the thugs and thugettes? My neighborhood, people say I'm the mayor. I take no stuff. I'm not bragging. I'm telling you a fact. My shade in my window is broke, and I don't care. I mean, it's not broke. It's like a little permanent, because I'm always in my car, which sits right by my bedroom. If somebody if I hear someone's loud music, man, I may not be a thug, I come from Newark, and I was born in Harlem. You don't mess with me. You say that OG, and it's good. So we need to take back our neighborhoods. We should never let what happened back 54 years ago happen. But we should never forget that it happened. To God be the glory. I rambled, but again, this had has my emotions going because I'm still trying not to cry. Oh, goodness, 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 I'm not crying. So, if you watched it to the end, thank you. Probably one of my relatives. I speak the truth. I know who watches and who doesn't, but to God be the glory. Those who choose not to get the information, that's okay. Information is information, whether people get it or not. And thank you, Steve, for giving me that moniker, elder statesman, and I accept it as the village elder in Africa. I am my elder here. God be the glory. To God be the glory. What's up? In Jesus' name.